The distant planet Kepler 442c floated silently in the outer rim of human space, forgotten by almost everyone who mattered, while the wealthy core worlds built towering cities that reached toward the stars and trained their brightest minds in gleaming military academies, and while the frontier colonies drew brave pioneers seeking fortune and glory, Kepler 442c received only the unwanted. 300 people lived there, scattered across a handful of prefabricated buildings that looked more like metal boxes than homes. Most of the colonists were farmers whose crops had failed on better worlds, veterans whose injuries had forced them into early retirement, and a small group of scientists who studied the strange crystal formations that grew like frozen lightning throughout the planet's surface. The crystals were beautiful, but seemed useless, catching sunlight in brilliant rainbows, but serving no practical purpose that anyone could determine. Rachel Davis stood at the window of her small office, watching maintenance crews struggle with the colony's aging fusion reactor. She had once been an important administrator on New Geneva, one of humanity's most prosperous worlds. Her career had been rising steadily, until a single mistake in a supply contract had somehow snowballed into a major scandal. The media had painted her as corrupt, though she had merely signed the wrong document. Now she found herself in charge of humanity's most forgotten outpost, managing 300 people who had nowhere else to go. The settlement itself was a testament to humanity's tendency to build things as cheaply as possible. Prefabricated housing pods dotted the landscape like scattered dice, each one barely large enough for a family. The agricultural domes that fed the colony were patched with so many repairs that they looked like metal quilts. The single fusion reactor that powered everything wheezed and groaned like an old man climbing stairs, constantly threatening to break down completely. Their orbital defense platform was a joke. Built 15 years ago with technology that was already outdated, it had enough firepower to maybe discourage pirates, but would be useless against any serious military threat. The platform's weapon systems hadn't been updated since installation, and half the sensors didn't work properly. Rachel often wondered if Earth's military planners had even remembered that Kepler 442c existed when they were distributing defense upgrades. The colony's military protection consisted of 12 Marines, all of them well past their prime. They were led by Sergeant Major Jack Thompson, a tough veteran whose left arm had been replaced with cybernetics after a battle on some distant world. The artificial limb worked well enough, but it had an annoying habit of sparking whenever the weather got humid, which happened frequently on Kepler 442c. Thompson was a good soldier, but even he knew that 12 aging Marines couldn't defend against much more than local wildlife. For months, troubling news had been filtering in from other human colonies. An alien war fleet was systematically attacking human settlements, moving through space like a plague. They called themselves the Hegemony, and their ships were more advanced than anything humanity possessed. Their plasma weapons could slice through the strongest human armor like it was paper, and their ground forces had never lost a single battle. Colony after colony fell before them, some surrendering immediately, others fighting briefly before being overwhelmed. The aliens seemed to be following a careful plan, attacking the most important targets first. Military bases fell within hours. Industrial worlds were captured intact, their factories converted to serve alien purposes. Even heavily defended core worlds were struggling to mount effective resistance. The frontier colonies, with their makeshift defenses and scattered populations, lasted mere minutes once the aliens arrived. Intelligence reports suggested that the aliens were working from some kind of list, prioritizing targets based on strategic value. First came the military installations and major population centers, then the industrial worlds and trade hubs. After that, the agricultural planets that fed the core worlds. Finally, if they bothered at all, they would mop up the remaining outposts and research stations that served no important purpose. Kepler-442c was clearly in that final category. Rachel had studied the pattern of attacks and realized that her little colony would probably be among the very last targets, if the aliens even bothered with them at all. In some ways, being unimportant was a form of protection. The aliens might simply ignore them entirely, focusing their attention on worlds that actually mattered. That protection ended abruptly when Lieutenant Sarah Kim burst into Rachel's office without knocking, her face pale with fear. The young communications officer had been monitoring long-range sensors when she detected something that made her blood run cold. 4 massive ships had just dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, their energy signatures matching known alien vessel types. 3 cruisers and 1 dreadnought were heading directly toward Kepler-4 to see, their estimated arrival time less than 8 hours away. Rachel stared at the sensor data, feeling her stomach drop. Each of those cruisers probably carried more firepower than the entire human defense fleet in this sector. The dreadnought was large enough to level their entire settlement from orbit, without even landing troops. Her first instinct was immediate surrender, hoping that cooperation might save some lives. What else could they do? 300 farmers and retirees against an alien war machine that had crushed dozens of better worlds. It would be like trying to stop an avalanche with a handful of pebbles. The emergency meeting in the colony's main conference room was supposed to be about surrender. Rachel Davis had called together the senior staff to discuss how they might negotiate with the incoming alien fleet, perhaps offering to provide supplies or information in exchange for the lives of the colonists. The room was cramped and poorly lit, with a single holographic display showing the approaching enemy ships as red dots moving steadily toward their world. Sergeant Major Jack Thompson sat at the far end of the table, his cybernetic arm resting on the surface as he studied the tactical information. His weathered face bore the scars of dozens of battles, and his gray eyes held the hard wisdom of a soldier who had seen too much death. When Rachel finished explaining her thoughts about surrender, Thompson shook his head slowly. "Ma'am, with all due respect, these aliens don't take prisoners," he said, his voice carrying the weight of grim certainty. "We've been monitoring the communications from other colonies before they went dark. The reports from Proxima Station were clear before their transmissions stopped. These creatures kill everyone they find, military and civilian alike. They don't want our surrender. They want our planet, and they want us gone." Thompson pulled up additional data on his personal tablet, showing intercepted transmissions from the last few colony attacks. "Look at the pattern. They land troops, secure the area, and then systematically eliminate every human they can find. Sometimes they keep a few alive for questioning, but not for long. Surrender isn't an option because they don't want to rule us. They want to replace us." The room fell silent as the weight of his words sank in. Rachel felt her stomach tighten as she realized that their situation was even worse than she had imagined. At least if the aliens took prisoners, some of the colonists might survive, especially the children and elderly. But if Thompson was right, they were all facing certain death regardless of what they did. Dr. Amy Wilson had been sitting quietly in the corner throughout the discussion, her fingers drumming nervously on the table's surface. She was the colony's chief researcher, a woman in her early 40s who had spent the last 6 years studying Kepler-4 for 2C's unique geological features, while the others talked about evacuation shuttles and communication protocols. Her mind was racing through years of accumulated data about the planet's most distinctive characteristic, the crystalline formations that covered much of Kepler-442c's surface had fascinated her since her arrival. Most people saw them as nothing more than beautiful decorations, catching and reflecting sunlight in spectacular displays of color. But Amy had discovered that they were far more than pretty rocks. The crystals were piezoelectric, meaning they generated electrical charges when subjected to mechanical stress like pressure or vibration. Her research had revealed massive crystal caverns beneath the main settlement, formations that had grown over millions of years into complex networks of interconnected chambers, The crystals weren't just scattered randomly through the rock. They formed intricate patterns that seemed almost designed to amplify and focus electrical energy. When she had conducted small experiments with controlled explosions, the results had been remarkable. Even tiny amounts of pressure could generate surprising amounts of electrical discharge. "What if we don't run?" Amy said suddenly, interrupting a heated argument between two other staff members about which evacuation route might be safest. Her voice was quiet, but something in her tone made everyone stop talking and turn to look at her. "What if instead of trying to escape or surrender, we turn this place into a trap?" she continued, standing up and moving to the holographic display. "I've been studying the crystal formations under our settlement for 6 years. They're not just decorative, they're piezoelectric, which means they generate massive electrical charges when you apply pressure or make them vibrate." She began pulling up her research data, showing cross-sectional views of the underground cavern systems. The images revealed an enormous network of crystalline chambers stretching 4 kilometers beneath the colony, with the largest concentration directly under the main settlement area where the aliens would most likely land their troops. "These caverns are huge, and they're filled with crystals that have been growing and connecting for millions of years," Amy explained, her excitement growing as she outlined her idea. "If we could destabilize them with mining charges, create controlled explosions at key structural points, we could generate an electrical discharge unlike anything anyone has ever seen." The plan was completely insane, even by the desperate standards of their situation. They would use the colony's mining equipment to place explosive charges at critical points throughout the underground crystal network. When the alien troops landed in the main plaza, as military doctrines suggested they would, for maximum psychological impact, Amy would trigger the explosions simultaneously. The resulting collapse wouldn't just destroy the caverns, it would create a massive piezoelectric effect, generating electrical charges that would be amplified and focused by the remaining crystal formations. If her calculations were correct, the discharge would be channeled upward through the planet's naturally conductive soil, creating an electromagnetic pulse powerful enough to disable any electronic equipment in the area. Thompson studied the geological surveys with growing interest, his tactical mind immediately grasping the potential of such a weapon. "Doc, this is completely crazy," he said with a slow grin spreading across his scarred face. "You might be even crazier than me, and that's saying something, but I like it. If we're going to die anyway, we might as well take some of these alien bastards with us." The alien warfleet emerged from the twisted space of hyperspace travel with the confidence of predators who had never known defeat. For massive ships materialized in the darkness beyond Kepler-4 for to see, their hulls gleaming with the advanced metal alloys that made them nearly indestructible. The largest vessel, a dreadnought the size of a small city, took position at the center of the formation, while 3 sleek cruisers spread out in a protective triangle around it. Commander Vector stood on the bridge of his flagship, studying the pitiful human colony through long-range sensors. His species had conquered 17 human worlds in the past 6 months, and each victory had been easier than the last. The humans were weak, their technology primitive, their military forces scattered and poorly organized. This backwater settlement would fall within minutes, just like all the others. The pre-assault bombardment began exactly on schedule. Plasma cannons that could melt through starship armor fired precisely targeted shots at the colony's orbital defense platform. The ancient human installation died in brilliant flashes of superheated metal, its outdated weapon systems offering no resistance whatsoever. Additional plasma strikes eliminated the colony's communication array and what appeared to be their main power generator, though the energy readings had been so weak that Vector wondered if the humans had been using primitive fusion technology. Through his ship's advanced sensors, Vector could see the human settlement spread out below like a collection of metal boxes scattered across the planet's surface. Thermal imaging showed the colonists huddled inside their buildings, exactly as expected. Some appeared to be moving toward what looked like underground shelters, probably hoping that a few meters of rock and metal would protect them from the coming assault. Their naive faith in such simple defenses was almost touching. The landing operation proceeded with military precision that had been perfected through dozens of successful invasions. Dropships launched from the cruisers in perfect formation, each one carrying 50 elite warriors, equipped with energy weapons and powered armor. The ships descended through the planet's atmosphere like falling stars, their heat shields glowing red as they cut through the air at tremendous speed. At exactly 14:32 local time, the first wave of dropships touched down in the settlement's main plaza. The aliens had chosen this location because it was the largest open area near the human buildings, perfect for deploying troops in intimidating formation. Military doctrine called for maximum psychological impact during the initial landing, and nothing accomplished that goal better than the sight of 2,000 heavily armed warriors appearing in the heart of the enemy's home. The plaza had been conveniently cleared of obstacles, with no vehicles or equipment that might interfere with the landing. Vecto assumed the humans had moved everything out of the way while fleeing to their shelters, making his job even easier. The dropship doors opened with mechanical precision, and wave after wave of alien soldiers poured out onto the human colonies. Each warrior stood nearly 7 feet tall, their bodies covered in advanced combat armor that could deflect most human weapons. Energy rifles charged with deadly plasma hung ready in their hands, capable of burning through metal walls or reducing human bodies to ash in seconds. They moved with the disciplined coordination of troops who had never lost a battle, forming defensive perimeters and advancing toward the human buildings with methodical efficiency. Deep beneath the settlement, Dr. Amy Wilson crouched in a hastily constructed command bunker that had been carved from solid rock. Banks of monitoring equipment surrounded her, showing thermal readings from the surface that made her heart race with anticipation and terror. She could see the heat signatures of exactly 2,000 alien soldiers spreading across the plaza, their body temperatures slightly higher than human normal, making them easy to track through the colony's remaining sensor network. Her finger rested on a simple switch that looked completely ordinary, like something that might control the lights in a storage room. But this switch was connected to a network of mining charges that had been placed throughout the crystal caverns over the past 6 hours. Every colonist had helped with the desperate preparation, carrying explosives through narrow tunnels and placing them at precisely calculated locations that Amy had marked on her geological surveys. Sergeant Major Thompson's voice crackled through her communication headset, transmitted from his own hidden position where he was coordinating the colony's few remaining defenses. Thermal signatures confirm they're all in the kill zone, she whispered back, watching as the last of the alien dropships completed their deployment. The enemy forces were now concentrated in exactly the area where her calculations suggested the electromagnetic pulse would be most effective. "Do it," Thompson growled through the radio, his voice carrying the hard determination of a soldier who had accepted that this would probably be his last battle. Amy pressed the switch. The explosion that followed wasn't visible from space, hidden as it was beneath kilometers of solid rock. But what the alien fleet detected through their sophisticated sensors was something far more devastating than any conventional weapon. A massive electromagnetic pulse erupted from the planet's surface like an artificial solar flare, its energy channeled and amplified through millions of years of crystalline growth. The pulse raced upward through the conductive soil at the speed of light, carrying more electrical energy than the aliens had ever encountered in their conquest of dozens of worlds. The underground explosion sent shockwaves racing through the planet's crust like ripples in a pond. But these ripples carried the power to shake mountains. The blast wave moved at the speed of sound, approximately 1 kilometer every 3 seconds, cracking through layers of ancient rock that had remained undisturbed for millions of years. But the electrical discharge that followed moved far faster, racing through the crystalline network at the speed of light, covering the same distance in mere microseconds. On the surface, the 2,000 alien warriors had no warning of what was about to happen. They stood in perfect military formation across the settlement's main plaza, their energy weapons powered and ready, their advanced armor systems running diagnostics and environmental scans. In the span of a single heartbeat, everything changed. The first sign of trouble came when their weapons began to malfunction. Energy rifles that had functioned flawlessly through dozens of battles suddenly started overheating, their power cells registering impossible energy spikes. Plasma charges that should have been stable began fluctuating wildly, their containment fields wavering as electrical interference disrupted the delicate magnetic bottles that held the superheated matter. Then their armor began to fail. Each suit was a masterpiece of alien engineering, powered by compact fusion cells and controlled by sophisticated computer systems that monitored everything from air filtration to muscle enhancement. The sudden electromagnetic pulse overloaded every circuit simultaneously, causing cascading failures that rippled through each system like dominoes falling in sequence. The warriors' communication implants, surgically installed devices that allowed instant coordination across the battlefield, began shorting out in cascades of neural feedback. The aliens screamed as electrical discharges fired directly into their nervous systems, sending waves of agony through their bodies. Some collapsed immediately, their implants completely destroyed. Others staggered blindly, their enhanced senses overwhelmed by static and electronic noise. But the electromagnetic pulse was just beginning its devastating work. Deep beneath the colony, the crystal caverns that Dr. Wilson had studied for 6 years were revealing their true nature. The formations weren't merely piezoelectric, generating electricity when subjected to pressure. They were something far more sophisticated, the product of geological forces that had been working for eons to create a natural wonder. Millions of years of tectonic pressure had compressed and shaped the crystals into precise geometric patterns, forming what was essentially a planet-sized resonance chamber. The crystal formations were arranged in complex spirals and interconnected networks that seemed almost designed to amplify and focus electrical energy. When the mining charges detonated at carefully calculated points throughout the system, they didn't just create a simple electrical discharge. They created a planetary-scale lightning rod. The electromagnetic pulse didn't dissipate as it moved upward through the planet's crust. Instead, it was channeled and concentrated by the remaining crystal formations, gathered into an increasingly powerful beam of electrical energy that lanced toward the surface like a spear of pure lightning. The planet's naturally conductive soil, rich in metallic minerals, provided a perfect pathway for the discharge to follow. When the pulse broke through the surface and entered the atmosphere, it encountered Kepler-442c's unique magnetic field. Most planets had relatively simple magnetic fields generated by molten metal cores, but this world was different. The same crystal formations that focused the electromagnetic pulse also influenced the planet's magnetic properties, creating complex field patterns that acted like invisible lenses. The pulse was magnified again as it raced upward through the atmosphere, its intensity growing to levels that defied belief. What had begun as a controlled explosion in underground caverns had become an electromagnetic burst with the power output of a small star, focused into a coherent beam that shot toward the alien fleet like a weapon designed by gods. The alien cruiser's defensive shields had been designed to deflect plasma cannons and kinetic projectiles, threats that any military engineer could anticipate and counter. Their energy barriers could stop missiles traveling at significant fractions of light speed, and their armor could absorb the output of nuclear weapons without suffering serious damage. But they were utterly unprepared for a concentrated electromagnetic pulse of this magnitude. The first cruiser's shields flickered and died as the pulse struck them, the energy barriers simply unable to process the enormous electrical load. the ship's hull, designed to conduct and disperse energy attacks, instead became a conductor that channeled the pulse directly into the vessel's internal systems. Every circuit, every computer, every piece of electronic equipment aboard the ship was instantly overwhelmed. One by one, the warships went dark. Their fusion reactors, detecting catastrophic power fluctuations that could lead to containment failure, automatically shut down in emergency procedures that had been programmed by cautious engineers. Life support systems switched to emergency battery power. But even those backup systems began failing as residual electrical energy continued to arc through the ship's hulls. Weapons systems that had dominated battlefields across the galaxy cycled offline, their targeting computers overwhelmed by electronic noise. Navigation systems lost their ability to track position or plot courses. Communication arrays that had coordinated the conquest of dozens of worlds fell silent as their transmitters burned out. Commander Vector stood on his flagship's bridge, watching in horror as his fleet died around him. Emergency lighting cast everything in red shadows, and the air recycling systems had begun to emit concerning noises. His tactical display, which moments before had shown his forces in complete control of the situation, now showed nothing but static and error messages. In exactly 7 minutes, the most powerful alien task force in this sector of space had been reduced to 4 helpless hulks, drifting in orbit around a planet they had intended to conquer. The rescue fleet from Earth arrived 3 days after the electromagnetic pulse had turned the alien task force into floating scrap metal. Captain Maria Rodriguez commanded the lead destroyer, and she had expected to find either a thriving alien occupation or the burned remains of another failed human colony. Instead, her sensors detected 4 massive alien warships drifting powerless in orbit. Their hulls dark and their engines cold, the alien vessels showed no signs of life support or active weapons systems. When Rodriguez's crew attempted to establish communication with the ships, they received only silence in response. Emergency broadcasts on all frequencies went unanswered, and detailed scans revealed that the alien ships were completely without power. It was as if someone had simply turned off a switch and left 4 of the galaxy's most advanced warships floating like abandoned toys. On the planet's surface, the situation was equally surprising. The human settlement was still intact, its prefabricated buildings undamaged, and its population very much alive. The colonists emerged from underground shelters to greet the rescue ships, their faces showing a mixture of exhaustion and pride that Rodriguez had never seen before. These people had not just survived an alien attack, they had won. The alien ground forces had surrendered on the 2nd day after the electromagnetic pulse. Once it became clear that their situation was hopeless. 2,000 elite warriors, the same troops who had conquered dozens of human worlds, had spent 48 hours with no working weapons, no communication with their fleet, and no hope of extraction. Their advanced combat armor had become little more than expensive metal suits, and their energy weapons were now useless chunks of crystallized plasma. Colony Administrator Rachel Davis walked slowly across the settlement's main plaza, studying the massive crater that had opened where the crystal caverns once existed. The explosion had been so powerful that it had created a hole nearly a kilometer wide and several hundred meters deep, exposing layers of rock that had been hidden beneath the surface for millions of years. Steam still rose from the crater's depths, where superheated rock was slowly cooling in the planet's atmosphere. The colonists had survived by following Dr. Wilson's careful planning during the 6 hours of preparation before the alien landing. Every person in the settlement had moved into the old mining tunnels that honeycombed the area around the colony. These tunnels had been carved from solid, non-conductive rock that provided perfect protection from the electromagnetic pulse. While the aliens above ground suffered from electronic failures and neural feedback, the humans below ground had been completely safe. Sergeant Major Thompson approached Davis with a military datapad in his hand, his cybernetic arm working perfectly now that the colony's power systems had been restored. His weathered face showed satisfaction mixed with disbelief, as if he was still processing what they had accomplished. "Ma'am, Fleet Command wants a complete tactical report on what happened here. Seems word is already spreading through human space about our little victory." The news was indeed spreading faster than anyone had expected. Within hours of the rescue fleet's arrival, communication networks throughout human space were buzzing with reports of the impossible victory on Kepler-4 for to see. A colony with 300 people and 12 aging Marines had somehow defeated an alien task force that had previously crushed worlds with millions of inhabitants and modern military defenses. Dr. Amy Wilson emerged from her makeshift laboratory, where she had been working non-stop since the battle to analyze the results of her desperate plan. Her clothes were wrinkled and her hair was disheveled, but her eyes shone with the excitement of a scientist who had just made a discovery that would change everything. She carried several data tablets filled with geological surveys and energy readings that documented exactly what had happened when the crystal caverns collapsed. "I've been running calculations for the past 3 days," Wilson said, approaching Davis and Thompson with barely contained enthusiasm. "The electromagnetic pulse we generated was even more powerful than my most optimistic projections. But here's the really important part. This isn't unique to our planet. There are 17 other human colonies that I know of, built on similar crystalline formations." She activated her data tablet, showing a star map with several worlds highlighted in green. "These colonies all have the same type of piezoelectric crystal networks beneath their surfaces. With some modifications to the technique we used here, we could potentially turn each of these worlds into defensive weapons. Imagine if every alien fleet that attacked a human colony faced the possibility of being disabled in minutes." Davis studied the star map quietly, understanding the implications of what Wilson was suggesting. "You're talking about turning entire planets into weapons," she said slowly. "That's not just defense anymore. That's creating a deterrent system that could change the balance of power in this war." The psychological impact of the victory was already becoming apparent in the messages arriving from other human colonies. 4 months, human settlements had been surrendering without a fight or evacuating at the first sign of alien ships. The enemy had seemed invincible, their technologies so advanced that resistance appeared futile, but Kepler-4 for to see had proven that even the most powerful alien task force could be defeated by human ingenuity and determination. As news of the 7-minute war spread throughout human space, something fundamental began to change in the way people thought about the conflict. The forgotten colony had reminded everyone of humanity's greatest strength, not their technology or their numbers, but their absolute refusal to accept defeat. When faced with impossible odds, humans didn't give up. They found a way to fight back, even if it meant turning their own planet into a weapon. The victory on Kepler-4 for to see would be remembered as the moment when the tide of war began to turn, when humanity stopped running and started fighting back with the kind of desperate creativity that had carried their species from caves to stars.